I was sitting on my back porch enjoying a rare moment of peace when I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine, not just any engine, but the heavy rumble of construction equipment. The noise grew louder, closer, until I could feel the vibrations beneath my feet. I set down my coffee cup and stood up, squinting against the morning sun as I tried to identify the source. That's when I saw it. A bulldozer rolling down my street, followed by a pickup truck with Lakeside Contractors emblazoned on the side. They weren't slowing down, they were heading straight for my property. My name is Victor Mercer, and until that moment, I thought I had a pretty good handle on life in Pinehaven Estates. I'd moved here 3 years ago after my divorce, looking for a fresh start in this upscale neighborhood outside of Portland, Oregon. The houses were nice, the community was quiet, and the location was perfect for my work as an architectural consultant. Sure, there was the homeowners association to deal with, but I'd figured that was a small price to pay for well-maintained streets and property values that only went up. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. I jogged down my back steps and cut through the side yard, reaching the front just as the bulldozer turned into my driveway. A woman stepped out of the pickup truck, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. I recognized her immediately. Patricia Billings, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," she called out, her voice carrying that false sweetness that always made me cringe. "We're here on official HOA business." "What kind of business involves bringing heavy machinery to my house at 8 in the morning?" I demanded, planting myself between the bulldozer and my property. Patricia's smile didn't waver. "We've given you multiple notices about the code violations regarding that storage building of yours." She gestured toward the wooden structure at the back corner of my property. "Today's the day we remedy the situation." My blood ran cold. The storage building had been my weekend project for months, a place to keep my tools, my mountain bike, and the various architectural models I built for clients. I designed it myself, matching the cedar siding of my house, even adding small dormer windows that mirrored my home's craftsman style. "You can't be serious," I said. "That building is fully permitted. I submitted all the paperwork to the HOA and the city." Patricia's smile tightened. "You submitted plans, yes, but the building doesn't match those plans. It's 2 feet taller than approved, the windows weren't in the original design, and the cedar siding isn't on our approved materials list." She held up her clipboard, flipping through pages. "We've sent you 3 violation notices over the past 2 months." "I never received any notices," I protested, though even as I said it, I remembered the pile of HOA mail I'd been ignoring. In my defense, they sent so many pointless updates and warnings that I'd fallen into the habit of tossing them directly into my recycling bin. "That's unfortunate, but irrelevant at this point. The board has voted. The structure comes down today." The operator of the bulldozer, a heavy-set man with a weathered face, was watching our exchange with obvious discomfort. "This is insane," I said. "You can't just demolish someone's property without proper notice or a court order." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Actually, Mr. Mercer, if you'd bothered to read the covenants you signed when you purchased your home, you'd know that we can. Section 8, Paragraph 12 gives the HOA the right to remedy violations at the homeowner's expense if they fail to comply with notices." "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. "Go ahead," she replied, entirely unfazed. "They'll tell you it's a civil matter. Now please step aside so we can proceed." I didn't move. "Patricia, be reasonable. Let me see these supposed violations. I can fix whatever doesn't comply." "You've had 2 months to fix them," she said, her voice hardening. "Now it's too late." The bulldozer operator cleared his throat. "Madam, if the homeowner is objecting, maybe we should. You were hired to do a job, Mr. Keller." Patricia cut him off. "Either do it, or I'll find someone who will." I stood my ground, frantically trying to think of a legal way to stop this. I knew enough about property law to realize Patricia might actually be right about the police considering it a civil matter. Still, I wasn't about to stand by while they destroyed thousands of dollars of my property and hundreds of hours of my work. "Fine," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "Let me get my things out first. I have expensive tools and equipment in there." Patricia checked her watch. "You have 15 minutes. Anything left inside after that is your own fault." I raced to the storage building, my mind whirling. This couldn't be happening. As I flung open the door, I was hit with the familiar scent of cedar and sawdust. I'd built this place from the ground up, a sanctuary for my creativity. Now I had to frantically salvage what I could. I grabbed the most valuable items first. My professional-grade table saw, my collection of hand-carved chisels from Japan, the vintage transit level that had been my father's. I made trip after trip, carrying armloads to my garage while Patricia stood watching, arms crossed, occasionally checking her watch. "5 minutes, Mr. Mercer," she called out as I struggled with a particularly heavy workbench. I couldn't save everything. My heart sank as I realized I'd have to leave behind the built-in cabinets, the custom workbenches, the specialized storage systems I'd designed for my architectural models. When my 15 minutes were up, Patricia made a show of looking at her watch. "Time's up. Mr. Keller, proceed." "Wait," I shouted, making one last dash for the mountain bike hanging on the wall. As I emerged with it, the bulldozer's engine roared to life. What happened next still plays in my mind in slow motion. The blade of the bulldozer rose, then pushed forward, crashing into the side of my storage building. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. The structure that had taken me months to build began to crumble, pieces falling as if in a controlled demolition. I stood there, bike in hand, watching helplessly as my creation was reduced to a pile of broken wood and twisted metal. The sound of tearing lumber and crunching glass filled the air, drowning out the birds that had been singing just moments earlier. It took less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Patricia approached me with a document. "This is the bill for today's remediation," she said, holding out the clipboard. "Per the HOA covenants, the cost will be added to your quarterly dues. Failure to pay will result in a lien on your property." I stared at the number at the bottom of the page, $3,845.72. They were charging me for destroying my own property. "This isn't over," I said quietly. Patricia's smile returned, cold and confident. "It is for today, Mr. Mercer. Have a good morning." As they drove away, leaving the pile of debris behind, I stood in my driveway, surrounded by the tools and equipment I'd managed to save, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. I looked down at the clipboard Patricia had handed me, scanning the itemized list of charges until my eyes caught on something that made me pause. The name of the company hired for the demolition wasn't just any contractor. It was Lakeside Contractors, LLC, a company I recognized immediately. Not because I'd worked with them before, but because I owned the building they operated out of. Most people in Pinehaven Estates didn't know that I owned commercial property in town. 3 years ago, when I'd moved here after my divorce, I'd invested most of my settlement in a mixed-use building on Main Street. The ground floor housed several businesses, including Lakeside Contractors. The second floor contained office spaces, and the third floor was home to what everyone in the neighborhood called the community center, a large space with a kitchen and meeting rooms that the HOA rented from me for their monthly meetings, social events, and annual gatherings. That's right. Patricia Billings and her HOA board had just demolished my storage building, and they had no idea that I was their landlord. I went inside, set the clipboard on my kitchen counter, and poured myself a stiff drink. My hands were shaking with anger, but beneath that emotion, something else was taking root. A plan. The lease on the community center was coming up for renewal at the end of the month. I hadn't been paying much attention to it, letting my property manager handle the details. But now, suddenly, I was very interested in becoming personally involved. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer, Walter Jenkins. "Walter, it's Victor Mercer. I need your help with something urgent." "What's going on, Vic?" Walter's voice was calm, professional, exactly what I needed. "The HOA just bulldozed my storage building without proper notice or legal process. I need to know my options." I heard him sigh. "HOA disputes can be messy. Tell me everything." I recounted the morning's events, including the fact that I'd never received proper notice of the violations. "Did you check your mail?" Walter asked. "Courts tend to side with HOAs if they can show they sent notice, even if you claim you didn't receive it." "Honestly, I might have ignored some HOA mail," I admitted. "They send so much pointless stuff." "That complicates things," Walter said. "But bulldozing a structure seems extreme for a first enforcement action. Usually, there's a progression: warnings, fines, hearings before the board. Did you attend any hearings?" "No, I was never notified of any." Walter was silent for a moment. "That might be our angle. Even if they sent violation notices, they should have held a hearing before taking such drastic action. Do you have photos of the building before demolition, and documentation of any permits you obtained?" "Yes, to both. I documented the entire build process." "Good. And this bill they gave you, did you sign anything accepting responsibility for the costs?" "No, I refused to sign anything." "Smart move." I could hear him typing notes. "Okay, here's what we do. I'll file for an emergency injunction to prevent them from placing a lien on your property for these costs. Then we'll prepare a lawsuit for improper process, destruction of property, and possibly trespassing." I took a deep breath. "There's something else, Walter. I own the building where they hold their community meetings. Their lease is up for renewal at the end of the month." Walter went quiet. "Victor, I understand you're angry, but be careful about mixing these issues. Retaliation through your position as their landlord could complicate our legal position regarding the storage building." "I'm not talking about retaliation," I said, though that was exactly what I'd been thinking. "I'm talking about leverage. What if we use the lease negotiation as a way to resolve this entire situation amicably?" "That's potentially risky," Walter said carefully, "but if handled correctly, it could be effective. Let me think about this. In the meantime, document everything about today's incident, take photos of the debris, and don't communicate with the HOA board without me present." After hanging up, I went back outside and took photos of the destruction from every angle. Then I sat down at my computer and began composing an email to my property manager, requesting complete information about the HOA's lease terms. I also asked for any complaints or issues that had arisen during their tenancy. The response came quickly. The HOA had been model tenants, always paying on time, but they had been lobbying for extensive renovations to the space renovations I would be expected to pay for under the terms of the new lease they were proposing. My property manager had been preparing to negotiate these terms, but now I instructed him to hold off. I would be handling this personally. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sight of the bulldozer crashing into my storage building. Around 2 a.m., I got up and started researching everything I could find about HOA law in Oregon. By sunrise, I had a much clearer picture of my rights and of how Patricia Billings had overstepped her authority. The next morning, I called Walter again. "I want to schedule a meeting with the HOA board as soon as possible," I told him. "And I want you there with me. Are you sure that's wise?" he asked. "We haven't even filed the injunction yet." "I'm sure," I said. "I've got a plan." Walter agreed, albeit reluctantly, and by noon he had arranged a meeting for that evening. The HOA board would gather at 7 p.m. at where else? The community center I owned. I spent the afternoon preparing, gathering documents and rehearsing what I would say. At 6:45 p.m., Walter met me in the parking lot outside the community center. He looked polished in his tailored suit, a stark contrast to my intentionally casual attire jeans and a button-up shirt, the kind of clothes I'd worn while building the structure they'd destroyed. "Remember," Walter said as we approached the building, "stay calm. Let me do most of the talking. Emotional outbursts will only undermine our position." I nodded, though staying calm was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to see Patricia Billings' face when she realized who she was dealing with. The community center was a handsome brick building that had once been a small factory in the early 1900s. I'd renovated it myself, preserving the exposed brick walls and timber beams while modernizing the systems and amenities. The HOA space occupied the entire third floor, accessible by either stairs or an elevator I'd had installed at considerable expense. We took the elevator up, and as the doors opened, I could hear voices from the large meeting room down the hall. Walter and I exchanged a glance, and then he led the way. The HOA board consisted of 7 members, all seated at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia Billings sat center, flanked by her most loyal supporters: Wendy Evans, the treasurer, Ronald Davis, the secretary, and 4 other residents I recognized but didn't know by name. About a dozen other homeowners were scattered in chairs throughout the room, probably there for other HOA business. Patricia looked up as we entered, her expression flickering briefly with surprise, before settling into her usual mask of professional detachment. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "I see you've brought legal representation. That seems unnecessary for a simple board meeting." Walter stepped forward. "Miss Billings, I'm Walter Jenkins, representing Mr. Mercer in the matter of the unlawful destruction of his property yesterday morning. We're here to discuss resolution before we proceed with formal legal action." A murmur went through the room. Clearly, not everyone knew what had happened. Patricia's smile tightened. The removal of the non-compliant structure was conducted according to HOA bylaws after multiple notices were sent and ignored, but we can discuss this after our regular business, if you'd like to wait. "Actually," I said, stepping forward despite Walter's warning glance, "I think this should take precedence. After all, it's not every day the HOA orders the demolition of a fully permitted structure without proper due process." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Mercer, as I explained yesterday, your structure violated several provisions of the architectural guidelines. We sent multiple notices, which I never received," I interjected. "And the board voted unanimously to proceed with remediation," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Now, if you'd like to schedule time to present your concerns at next month's meeting, that won't be necessary," Walter cut in smoothly. "We have evidence that the HOA failed to follow its own procedures regarding enforcement actions." No hearing was scheduled, no opportunity to contest the alleged violations was provided, and the decision to demolish rather than issue fines or seek judicial approval was a gross overreach of authority. Ronald Davis, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. We did everything by the book. I personally mailed the notices. Were they sent certified mail with signature confirmation? Walter asked. Ronald hesitated. Well, no, but then you have no proof of delivery, Walter said. And more importantly, you have no documentation of a hearing where Mr. Mercer could contest these alleged violations. Patricia waved a dismissive hand. The bylaws don't specifically require a hearing for clear violations of the architectural guidelines. Actually, they do, I said, pulling out a copy of the HOA covenants I'd highlighted extensively the night before. Section 12. Paragraph 3 states that before any enforcement action beyond a fine can be taken, the homeowner must be given the opportunity to address the board at a regularly scheduled meeting. The room had grown quiet, all eyes on the confrontation unfolding before them. Furthermore, I continued, Section 15 specifically outlines the progressive nature of enforcement. First a warning, then a fine, then increased fines, and only after all those steps have failed can more drastic measures be considered, and even then, with board approval following a formal hearing. Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red. The board did approve the action, she insisted, in a properly noticed meeting, with minutes that were shared with all homeowners, Walter asked. Because we've reviewed the last 3 months of meeting minutes posted on your website, and there's no record of any discussion regarding Mr. Mercer's property. One of the board members I didn't know well, an older man with a military bearing, turned to Patricia. Is that true? I thought we were just approving the standard violation notice process. You never mentioned demolition. Patricia ignored him. Mr. Mercer, what exactly do you want? If it's compensation for your shed, I'm afraid that's not possible. The HOA acted within its rights. It's not a shed, I said, my voice rising despite my best intentions. It was a custom-designed storage building that matched my home's architecture, built with premium materials and craftsmanship. Whatever you want to call it, it violated the guidelines, Patricia insisted. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my plan. Actually, I'm not here to discuss compensation yet. I'm here to discuss something else entirely. Patricia frowned. What are you talking about? I looked around the room, taking in the exposed brick walls, the carefully restored timber ceiling beams, the gleaming hardwood floors I'd installed myself. This is a beautiful space, isn't it? Perfect for community gatherings, HOA meetings, social events. Several people nodded, clearly confused by my change of subject. I've always taken pride in maintaining it properly, I continued. As the owner of this building, I consider it my responsibility to provide my tenants with the highest quality facilities. The room went completely silent. I could almost hear the mental gears turning as the board members processed what I just said. Patricia's face drained of color. What did you say? I said, as the owner of this building, I take pride in maintaining it properly. I smiled at her, the same cold smile she'd given me the day before. Didn't you know? I purchased this building 3 years ago, right before I moved to Pinehaven Estates. I own the entire structure, including this community center the HOA has been leasing from me through my property management company. Wendy Evans, the treasurer, suddenly looked stricken. Your VM? Properties? That's right, I said. Victor Mercer Properties, LLC. I believe you've been negotiating with my property manager about renewing your lease, which expires. I made a show of checking my watch in exactly 18 days. The older board member with the military bearing let out a low whistle. Several homeowners in the audience were whispering to each other now. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. This is irrelevant to the matter of your code violations. You're attempting to intimidate the board with unrelated business matters. Walter cleared his throat. On the contrary, Miss Billings, these matters are now inextricably linked. The HOA unlawfully destroyed Mr. Mercer's property. Now Mr. Mercer, as your landlord, needs to evaluate whether he wishes to continue a business relationship with an organization that has demonstrated such disregard for proper procedure and respect for property rights. Are you threatening to evict the HOA? Ronald Davis asked, his voice rising with alarm. Not at all, I said. I'm simply pointing out that your lease is up for renewal, and I'm reconsidering the terms under which I'm willing to continue our relationship. Patricia stood up, her hands flat on the table. This is blackmail. It's business, I countered. Just like demolishing my storage building was business according to you yesterday. Walter placed a restraining hand on my arm, then addressed the board. My client is understandably upset about the destruction of his property. However, he's willing to consider an amicable resolution that would benefit all parties. What kind of resolution? Asked Wendy Evans, ignoring Patricia's warning glance. Walter nodded to me and I took over. First, the HOA will immediately withdraw the remediation charges of $3,845.72 that you attempted to bill me yesterday, I said. Second, you will reimburse me for the full value of the destroyed structure and its contents, which I've calculated at $32,450. Patricia scoffed. That's absurd. It was a simple shed. It was a custom-designed, fully permitted structure that matched my home's architecture, I corrected her. I have receipts for all materials, documentation of my labor hours at professional rates, and evidence of the equipment and supplies that were damaged when your contractor didn't allow me adequate time to remove them. And third, Walter continued, the HOA will issue a formal apology at the next board meeting, acknowledging that proper procedures were not followed, and will amend its enforcement practices to ensure due process in the future. Patricia was shaking her head before Walter even finished speaking. Absolutely not. We did nothing wrong. Patricia, Wendy said urgently, maybe we should discuss this privately before. There's nothing to discuss. Patricia cut her off. We followed the bylaws. Mr. Mercer is trying to use his position as the building's landlord to extort money from the HOA. I leaned forward. If that's your position, then I have no choice but to inform you that I will not be renewing the HOA's lease under the current terms. In fact, given the circumstances, I'm not inclined to renew it at all. The room erupted into concerned murmurs. The community center wasn't just a meeting place, it was the heart of the neighborhood's social activities. The annual holiday party, the summer barbecue, the monthly book club, the weekly seniors' coffee morning, all of these events happened in this space. You can't do that, Patricia insisted. We have rights as tenants. You have the right to remain in the space until your lease expires, Walter confirmed. After that, Mr. Mercer is under no obligation to renew your tenancy. The military-looking board member stood up. I've heard enough. Patricia, we need to call a recess and discuss this as a board. Patricia looked around the room, perhaps realizing for the first time that she was losing control of the situation. Fine. We'll take a 15-minute recess. Mr. Mercer, Mr. Jenkins, please wait outside. Actually, I said, as the property owner, I think I'll stay right here. You're welcome to find a private space to discuss if you'd like. Patricia's face contorted with barely suppressed rage, but she nodded stiffly and gestured for the board to follow her out of the room. As they filed out, the remaining homeowners broke into animated conversation, several approaching me with questions and comments. Did they really bulldoze your storage building? Asked a woman I recognized as living a few doors down from me. Without a hearing, added another neighbor. That seems extreme. I explained what had happened, showing them photos on my phone of the building before and after the demolition. By the time the board returned 15 minutes later, I had the support of nearly everyone in the room. Patricia led the board members back to their seats, her expression unreadable. Wendy Evans looked nervous, while Ronald Davis seemed resigned. The other board members had varying expressions of concern and annoyance. After discussion, Patricia began, her voice clipped. The board is prepared to offer the following. We will waive the remediation charges of $3,845.72. We will review our enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with the bylaws in the future. However, we cannot agree to reimburse you for the full amount you're claiming for the structure. We'll offer $10,000 as settlement for any damages. That's less than a third of the actual value, I pointed out. It's more than generous for what was essentially an oversized shed, Patricia insisted. I looked at Walter, who gave me a subtle nod. We had discussed beforehand how much I was willing to compromise. I'll accept $25,000 for the structure and contents, with the other conditions as stated, including a formal apology at the next board meeting, I said. In exchange, I'll agree to renew the HOA's lease for another 3 years at the current rate, with no increase. Wendy's eyes widened at this. I knew from my property manager that they had been expecting a significant rent increase based on current market rates. What I was offering would save the HOA thousands of dollars over the next 3 years. Patricia opened her mouth, likely to refuse, but Wendy cut her off. We accept those terms, she said quickly, provided they're documented in a formal settlement agreement. Wendy, Patricia hissed. We haven't voted all in favor of accepting Mr. Mercer's offer, the military board member asked, raising his own hand. Wendy's hand shot up immediately, as did Ronald's and 2 others. 5 out of 7, a clear majority. Patricia's face was a study in controlled fury. Fine, she bit out. We'll have our attorney draw up the agreement. Actually, Walter said smoothly, I've taken the liberty of preparing a draft settlement. He removed a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. You can have your attorney review it, of course, but this covers all the terms we've discussed. The next half hour was spent with the board reviewing the document, suggesting minor changes which Walter noted. Throughout it all, Patricia sat in stony silence, only speaking when absolutely necessary. Finally, Walter produced the revised document, which the board members signed one by one. Even Patricia, though her signature was so forceful it nearly tore the paper. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, I found myself face to face with Patricia by the elevator. You won't be HOA president forever, I said quietly. In fact, after this fiasco, I wouldn't be surprised if you're voted out at the next election. Her eyes narrowed. Is that a threat, Mr. Mercer? Not at all, just an observation. People don't appreciate leaders who abuse their authority and then cost the community thousands of dollars through their poor judgment. The elevator arrived, and several people got on. Patricia stepped in last, turning to face me as the doors began to close. This isn't over, she said, echoing my words from the day before. I smiled. Actually, Patricia, I think it is. The doors closed on her furious expression, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Walter clapped me on the back. Well played, he said. Though I have to say, I've never seen a property dispute resolved quite like this before. I got lucky, I admitted. If I hadn't owned this building, I'd probably be stuck with a demolished storage shed and a bill for the privilege. Walter nodded grimly. HOAs wield a lot of power, and not all homeowners have your unique leverage. But you've done more than just win your case today. You've potentially improved things for everyone in Pinehaven Estates. He was right. The settlement included a clause requiring the HOA to revise its enforcement procedures, ensuring proper notice and hearing rights for all homeowners. Patricia might still be in charge for now, but she'd be operating under much greater scrutiny, and with the knowledge that I'd be watching her every move. As we left the community center, I paused to look up at the building I'd renovated with such care. It was ironic that Patricia had demolished my storage building over alleged code violations when I'd put so much effort into making sure this building exceeded all code requirements. There was a lesson there about power and perspective that I hoped the HOA board would take to heart. The next day, I stopped by the debris pile that had once been my storage building. As I stood there, contemplating whether to rebuild or try something different, my neighbor Mark came over. "Heard what happened with the HOA," he said, shaking his head. "Patricia went way too far this time." "She did," I agreed, "but it's being addressed." Mark looked at the pile of broken wood and crushed materials. "You going to rebuild?" I nodded. "Eventually, but this time I'll make sure to get everything explicitly approved in writing first. And I'll actually read those HOA notices when they come in the mail." He laughed. "Smart move. Hey, word is there's going to be a special HOA meeting next week. Something about reviewing board leadership or some such. Might be worth attending." I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Over the next few days, the settlement check arrived as promised. I hired a crew to clear away the debris from my demolished storage building and began drawing up plans for a new one, this time with meticulous attention to the HOA guidelines. I also made a point of personally inspecting the community center, making notes of improvements that could be made to enhance the space for community events. The special HOA meeting the following week was indeed about reviewing board leadership, and it was packed. Nearly every homeowner in Pinehaven Estates attended, filling the community center to capacity. Patricia sat at the board table, her posture rigid, her expression frozen in a tight smile that never reached her eyes. The military board member, whose name I now knew was George Thompson, a retired Army colonel, called the meeting to order. "As you all know, recent events have raised concerns about our HOA's enforcement procedures," he began. "The board has agreed to a settlement with Mr. Mercer regarding the improper demolition of his storage building, which includes a formal apology." All eyes turned to Patricia, who stood up stiffly. "On behalf of the Pinehaven Estates Homeowners Association," she read from a prepared statement, "I apologize for the improper procedure followed in the matter of Mr. Mercer's storage building. The board acknowledges that proper notice and hearing requirements were not met, and we are committed to ensuring that all future enforcement actions comply fully with our bylaws and governing documents." Her voice was devoid of emotion, the apology clearly forced, but it was on the record now. George continued, "In light of these events and other concerns that have been raised about the leadership of the HOA, the board has voted to restructure our officer positions. Effective immediately, I will be assuming the role of president, with Wendy Evans continuing as treasurer and Michael Chen taking over as secretary." A ripple of surprise ran through the room, followed by scattered applause. Patricia's face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "You can't simply remove me without—" "We're not removing you from the board, Patricia," George clarified. "Just reassigning officer positions, which is within the board's authority under the bylaws. You'll continue to serve as a board member until the next regular election." Patricia gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting, leaving a momentary awkward silence in her wake. George cleared his throat. "Now, let's move on to discussing the revised enforcement procedures that will be implemented immediately." As the meeting continued, I found myself feeling unexpectedly optimistic about the future of our community. The HOA wasn't being abolished. It still served an important purpose in maintaining our neighborhood, but its powers were being balanced with proper respect for homeowners' rights. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to express their support and share their own stories of run-ins with Patricia's heavy-handed leadership. It seemed I wasn't the only one who'd been on the receiving end of her selective enforcement. George Thompson caught up with me as I was leaving. "Mr. Mercer," he said, extending his hand, "I want to personally apologize for what happened with your storage building. I should have asked more questions when Patricia presented the enforcement action for approval." I shook his hand. "I appreciate that, and I'm glad to see the HOA moving in a new direction." "About that," he said, lowering his voice, "I understand you're the owner of this building." I nodded. "I'd like to discuss some improvements we might make to the space, with your approval, of course. Nothing extravagant, but there are some community programs we've been wanting to expand, and with the money we're saving on the lease renewal." "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said. "In fact, I've been thinking about some upgrades myself." Over the next few months, a remarkable transformation took place in Pinehaven Estates. Under George's leadership, the HOA became more transparent, with meeting agendas and minutes promptly posted online and enforcement actions subject to clear procedures and oversight. Patricia remained on the board but was increasingly isolated as her proposals for stricter rules were repeatedly voted down. I rebuilt my storage building, this time with full, documented approval from the HOA. I even invited the board members to an open house when it was completed, serving drinks and showing off the proper permits and approved plans. Everyone came except Patricia. The settlement money covered the cost of the rebuild with enough left over for some upgraded tools and equipment. I found myself using the new space not just for storage, but for small woodworking projects that I began offering to neighbors: custom mailbox posts, garden benches, decorative shutters, all designed to comply with HOA guidelines while adding unique character to our homes. As for the community center, I worked with George and the board to implement several improvements: a modern audiovisual system for meetings and movie nights, a renovated kitchen for community events, and adjustable partitions that allowed the space to be configured for different activities. The HOA covered some of the costs from their reserves, and I absorbed the rest as the property owner, viewing it as an investment in both the building and the community. Patricia Billings didn't run for re-election when her term ended 6 months later. Rumor had it she was moving to a condominium downtown, where she wouldn't have to deal with yard maintenance or neighborhood politics. I couldn't say I was sorry to see her go. On the 1-year anniversary of the demolition incident, the HOA hosted a community barbecue at the center. As I mingled with my neighbors, many now friends rather than just familiar faces, George Thompson raised a toast. "To Victor Mercer," he said, lifting his glass, "who taught us all a valuable lesson about property rights, due process, and the proper limits of HOA authority." I laughed and raised my own glass. "And to the Pinehaven Estates HOA," I replied. "Proof that even the most broken systems can be fixed with the right leadership and community involvement." Later that evening, as the party wound down, I found myself standing by the window, looking out over our neighborhood. The neat houses with their well-maintained yards, the children playing in the common area, the sense of community that had grown stronger over the past year, all of it was what I'd hoped for when I moved here after my divorce, looking for a fresh start. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken the destruction of something I'd built to help build something better for everyone. My storage building had been rebuilt, stronger and fully compliant. The HOA had been rebuilt too, more transparent and fair. And I had rebuilt my connection to this community, no longer just the quiet architect who kept to himself, but an engaged neighbor with a unique stake in our shared space. Sometimes you have to tear things down before you can build them back better. Patricia Billings had taught me that lesson, though not in the way she intended. And as I watched my neighbors laughing and talking in the community center I owned, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the bulldozer that had started it all.